digital risk discussion. I'm Caren Shiozaki. I'm the CIO of a Santa Fe-based mortgage company. I'm also a senior fellow with the Devine Center of Excellence for Digital Security and Risk. I'm a member of the Fellows of the SIM Dallas-Fort Worth chapter and a co-founder of SIM National's DigiRisk SIG. Now I'm pleased to welcome back my friend and SIMDFW member, Peter Vogel. Peter is an attorney with Foley & Lardner. He's a member of Foley's Privacy, Security, and Information Management and Technology Transactions and Outsourcing Practices. So Peter, thanks so much for coming back to chat with me.
Oh, Caren, I've enjoyed these podcasts. It's been a lot of fun. Thanks.
Now, in our series, we've covered contractual considerations when vetting a potential cloud service provider. We talked about how you maintain the relationship, what you should do if the relationship gets bumpy, and how you can avoid those conflicts in the first place. But now, what happens when the relationship ends? There are a lot of things to consider as you close out business with your cloud vendor. But what takes place depends a lot on the circumstances surrounding that end. I mean, are you ending the relationship due to a performance issue, or has the contract just naturally ended and reached the end of term? Or is this a vendor, and you need to think about, is this a vendor that you want to engage with in the future? So Peter, is it safe to say that you need to think about the end at the very beginning?
Well, Caren, I think that's true probably with most any kind of contract. It's probably more critical with a cloud provider because there are a couple of things that could happen. You could continue on with that cloud provider. You could switch to another cloud provider, or you could do none of the above and go on-prem. So you need to kind of give it some thought at the beginning, I think. Well, Caren, I think today what we can do is we can follow up. I've been in each one of the first 4 podcasts, we've been talking about what does AWS and what does Amazon do. So I'd like to give some examples of some terms on their online click agreements and all that kind of maybe get some of our listeners to pay attention to what is the end going to be like. So why don't we go to some PowerPoint slides. So, every one of the first 4 podcasts, what we've been doing is talking about Amazon. And just as I just want to remind everybody, it's just an example. All the other cloud providers have similar terms. We look at they have a free term. And if you get the free service, then you get what you pay for. Sometimes it's important to pay a premium. Also, the contract was last updated, their customer last updated November 2020. And as I pointed out, when you have a dispute, as a matter of fact, I'm negotiating with a very large cloud provider right now, and we're having a major debate about what's a dispute and who calls it. And usually the vendor's the one that makes the decision whether there's truly a dispute. Also, it's important to look at definitions, including what's AWS content that belongs to them, but your content as a cloud customer. And they're encouraging people to use the end user stores. They have an Amazon Simple Storage service. So let's look at that. Amazon S3. And there are specific terms dealing with that. These are all completely unrelated to the main agreement. But as I pointed out in the red below, their durability is 11 nines. Well, that's pretty important to, if they're going to protect it. But they have a wide range of cost-effective ways of doing that with different cycles. And I think it's important to look at all these different use cases. How would you know in advance when you sign up to use the service, what are you going to need 3 or 4 or 5, 6 years later? Really a tough thing to do. And then the critical part, obviously, the disaster recovery. And also they offer services which they call S3 Glacier and Deep Archive. So when we look at this, we have to consider what is the pricing here. So that's important for anybody that's going to be leaving a service to know how expensive is it going to be to migrate from AWS to another cloud provider. Back to the definitions on who's the contracting party, obviously, that's important because it makes a difference in terms of how you go about making sure that it's the parent, your parent company, or a subsidiary or an affiliate. It makes a difference. And then what governing laws are included. And I mentioned this one last example, that we have these laws. We look at if you agree and you want that your data is stored in one of these other countries, another part of the world, that's what controls. So I think these are the kind of contractual terms that we need to take into account when the contract comes to an end. Caren?
No, that's all really good information, Peter. And I think as we wrap up this discussion, I was going to say, obviously, for pretty much any company today, data is their critical corporate asset. So if you're ending the cloud contract, it's usually not just a matter of everybody saying, okay, it's over, we had a good time, goodbye. Something's got to be done with that data, and depending on the circumstance around ending it, I mean, what, for example, if you've got to move data from vendor one to another storage source, I mean, what sort of things should we be concerned about?
Well, you know what? I hate to say it, but it isn't just data. You got legacy software that's out there. I mean, I have a client right now that's dealing with legacy AS400 technology, and the migration that we're looking at to go to another cloud service is very complicated because we don't know if it's really going to work. And I think we all have, everybody's got some legacy software. So the fact that you're pointing out the data, yeah, the data is critical, but the software is as well. And then you need to make sure that they can communicate with one another, because you can't just move to another service and say that's okay. Now, the other part of it that I think is great as to where we are today, and that is software as a service that is being provided by so many different cloud providers allows us to be very flexible, whether it's, let's just say, for example, it's an Oracle ERP technology, and you're migrating it from one place to another. There are a lot of hosts for such things. But as you pointed out, if for whatever reason you're migrating to another cloud provider, you need to take into account how expensive is it? How long will it take to do that? Because I look at these contract terms and it says you have like 60 days notice. I go, I can't migrate in 60 days, maybe 180 days. And so I think you have to be very thoughtful of how much time will it really take to do the migration.
So you have to, there is a lot to think about. It's not just a matter of, yeah, the contract ends. So I would say, you know, this whole series that we've done about how do you manage your contractual cloud risk, I think we touched on a lot of different concepts, a lot of different topics. It's by no means meant to be an exhaustive instructional series, if you will. I would have to say, personally, with my experience, and then also having these discussions with you, Peter, I'd say that getting top-notch legal advice is really, really important as you negotiate these pretty significant contracts.
No, I think that's true. And I pointed this out in podcast number 4, and that is there are an awful lot of lawyers who are involved in this space that do not have the technology background. So they're doing it. I'm not saying they're naive. It's just that they don't have the depth of understanding. So it's really important to find a lawyer that does have the technology understanding, because I have found that it's kind of the nature of the beast. Those of us who go to law school, when we get out, most people end up doing real estate or construction, whatever, because that's the job they get. Well, that also happens in IT. Doesn't mean they understand the IT, but they have jobs related to it. And it also depends on the industry. Like, for instance, I do a lot in healthcare, and there are an awful lot of lawyers out there that do not understand all the HIPAA laws and the state laws dealing with protecting the data privacy. And so I think you need to be able to make sure you get the right person and the right team together to help you negotiate these kinds of deals.
Yeah, and I would say, to your point about knowing the HIPAA laws, especially today, to understand the whole landscape of just general data privacy and protection laws as well. That's very, very important. So
yeah, GDPR and California Consumer Privacy Act, because other states have enacted similar laws. They're not identical, of course. And as these privacy laws come in, it has an impact. And I'll just give you another example, because this does relate. I help clients often with data breach notification requirements when there's an intrusion. And each of the 50 states have their own laws, and they're incompatible with one another. And so figuring out when you've got a data breach and who you report to is important, but that also impacts what is the cloud provider, what is their obligation to share that information with you when there's been an intrusion. So that's a pretty critical thing to include as well.
Absolutely. Well, Peter, I can't thank you enough for participating in this series. I mean, I found it enjoyable and very informative, and I hope our audience has found the same. So again, my gratitude to you for taking the time.
Well, it's been a great pleasure. Thanks so much for inviting me to participate in this podcast series.
All right. Well, I hope the audience, you've enjoyed this, and we'll sign out. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
If you have any questions, please email them to digiriskSig@simnet.org. We'll be happy to get the answers, and they will be posted on the DigiRiskSig website. And again, this podcast was produced in collaboration between the Dallas-Fort Worth SIM Fellows Group and the SIM DigiRiskSig. Thank you.